For your information, we're now moving on to a short debate on foreign and Commonwealth affairs, and then we will proceed afterwards to one on the environment, food and rural affairs, and those members who are listed under other topics will then be taken under the general debate. We still have the 5-minute limit on speeches. John MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Once again, I wish to raise the issue of human rights and the death penalty in India. Can I pay tribute to 4 organisations, Keshri Lahar, Liberation, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, who have continued to expose the failure of the Indian government to address human rights abuses effectively. Keshri Lahar launched its Way for Justice campaign and launched a petition now signed by over 100,000 to seek a full debate in Parliament on this issue, and I'm hopeful we'll be able to secure that later in the year. I want to raise 3 issues of concern. The first is the historic failure of the Indian government to bring to justice those that perpetrated the massacre of the Sikhs in Operation Blue Star in 1984, which started with the attack on the Golden Temple at Amritsar and resulted in the murder of hundreds of thousands of Sikhs in the following decade. It was described as India's hidden genocide. Despite various commissions of inquiry into abductions, disappearances, extrajudicial executions and secret cremations, Amnesty's latest report confirms that the Indian government has failed to hold the perpetrators to account. In 2004, I launched in this House, on the 20th anniversary of the massacre, a report called 1984, The Sikhs Crystal Nacht. We called then for an independent commission of truth and justice under the auspices of the UN to investigate this slaughter. Since then, there has been no progress, and the Sikhs are still awaiting justice. But what's even more galling is that there may well be 2 individuals, Jagdish Titler and KPS Gill, both accused of playing leading roles in the human rights violations in 1984 to 95, who may seek to visit Britain for the Olympics in their capacity as Olympic officials for India. It would be a travesty of justice and cause deep offence to the whole of the Sikh community in the United Kingdom if these brutes were allowed to enjoy this country's hospitality. But the human rights abuses go on. Human rights NGOs confirmed that the human rights violations against minorities continue today, including against the Sikhs. The Human Rights Watch report, its latest report, reported on custodial killings, police abuses, including torture. On average, 1,500 people now a year are dying in custody in Indian prisons and police stations. Rape is seen as used as a form of culture. For 18 years now, the Indian government has denied access to India to the UN rapporteur on torture. And Amnesty now reports over the last 2 years, 30 human rights defenders have been targeted for abuse by state and non-state organisations. 8 have been killed in the last 2 years as a result. And meanwhile, the Indian government has failed to repeal the laws that afford human rights abusers within the state impunity. Impunity seems to be common for the perpetrators of human rights abuses within India itself. This is not acceptable by any standards. But the ultimate violation of human rights is to take a person's life. That is why there was such shock and anger at the threat only months ago, after an 8-year hiatus, that the Indian government was to implement the death penalty against people like Professor Devinder Singh Bulla and Balwant Singh Rajoana. Professor Bulla was only convicted on a confession obtained by torture and later retracted. Balwant Singh Rajoana has already served 17 years on death row and has suffered enough. The threat of capital punishment for these individuals has been lifted for the time being. But now 2/3 of the world have renounced the death penalty. I say, as a friend of India, it's time that India did so too. I appreciate what the UK government has done in terms of its representations to the Indian government over the years, both the last government and this government. And I pay tribute to the work that the current minister has done in pressing the Indian government on these issues. But I urge once again that in our bilateral talks and also via the EU-India human rights dialogue, that once again we call on India to take decisive action to protect human rights, and in particular now to abolish the death penalty. It's time now that India address this issue. It stands alone amongst the developing world now in still supporting the abolition death penalty, one that is the largest democracy on the globe, should adhere to human rights and at the same time should ensure that capital punishment no longer is a stain on India itself.